Is there really a divine masculine? That's today's topic of discussion. Welcome to the Goddess Keys. Thank you for stopping by. Make sure you peruse all of the subliminals, the meditations, and the different lectures to support you with the art of world building. We blend the real and the unreal on this channel. So we move in the liminal space where things are neither this nor that. And today, this has been on my mind for a while, y'all, and it's been coming up in some consultations that I've had as well. And it's also just been coming up in my world. And it's this concept of, is there really a divine masculine, or is that just some kind of fairy tale that we've been fed? And this doesn't come from like a place of bitterness or anything. This actually comes from a place of study and going through my own processes of initiation. Something that I've been learning is that there is a specific code as it relates to the Y chromosome. And I go into this in a lot more depth on Genetic Path Cutter on Patreon. So you can check that out. I'm going like really in depth with that because a lot of folks who I work with are meant to be really, really powerful leaders and need to go through a process of initiation to do that, and ascertaining all of the different gatekeeping energies that are in their world and being able to not just overcome those gatekeeper energies, but to fully absorb them so that there are no blocked access points on your path, okay? So if that's you, so I'm talking to a very specific population, okay? If that's you, you have been meditating on this concept of the divine masculine, because one thing about the coding of the simulation, so I approach this journey not from spirituality, but more from a place of technomancy. If the world that we live in is a simulation, then there are codes within the simulation. So instead of focusing on different social issues above ground through different political means and institutional means, I've found it a lot more useful to tap into the coding of institutions, the coding of access points. And that has helped me to learn more about the nature of the Y chromosome and the importance that the Y chromosome presents when it comes to issues related to initiation, and also making sure that you are sovereign within the simulation. And I'm going to go into more depth about this, maybe in a live, I'm not quite sure, but this definitely goes into the way that the institution of marriage has been formulated, and how from a coding standpoint, marriage of some kind sometimes is, quote, needed in order to gain certain access points, or the coding of the Y chromosome is sometimes, quote, needed in order to gain certain access points. Now, if you're somebody who is in a same-sex relationship, right, a lot of times the person that you're with will adopt the role of the XX chromosome, i.e. the feminine, or the XY chromosome, i.e. the masculine. You know, I actually went to college with somebody who was very much a lesbian and very much did not want to be in the dynamics of being with a man. But the person that she ended up marrying took on the qualities and traits of the XY chromosome, and she ended up in a very heteronormative marriage, even though she was a lesbian, okay? So this does transcend gender, and, you know, from this point forward, I'm going to discuss, you know, the energies of the divine masculine as XY, and the energies of the divine feminine as XX, because these are codes within the simulation. And sometimes Y is actually a key to get past certain gatekeeping energies. So what do you do if you're coded as an XX chromosome and you are seeking to gain certain access to different ways of knowing, to getting past different like institutional blockages or what have you? Maybe you're looking to take on a deeper leadership within your community or within society. you will need to navigate the issue of why, the case of why, okay? And that's going to lead you into the divine masculine, because one thing about the coding of the simulation, and I describe this a lot more in my book, The Architect is Her. I actually discovered a lot of this through the process of writing this book. And, even that title of that book, The Architect is Her, it kind of is a contradiction. Because even though there are female architects, I'm not saying that, feminines can't be architects, but that is a very Y chromosome field of study. Okay, and it's for very good reason. A lot of times you need a certain access code to even be able to be an architect. So to be an XX chromosome and saying that you're the architect, it's actually sounds really off and weird. And that's something I learned while I was writing that book and navigating that journey. Okay. So why do I say this? So I mentioned this a bit in my live called The Birds and the Bees of Technomancy. So you can check out that live. It's the last live I did for more information. But essentially, if we look at the XX and the XY chromosome from a coding standpoint within the simulation, then the XX chromosome, also known as the feminine, would represent what is known as firmware or hardware within a system. We're talking technomancy here, okay? Whereas the XY chromosome would represent the software, also known as the apps within the simulation, okay? So the software is nothing without the hardware or the firmware. It needs to plant its seed in the hardware or the firmware, okay? So that's the XX chromosome, and that is also an analogy for the womb and, the way sperm travels to, impregnate a seed and all that kind of stuff. But from a technomantic approach or from a software engineering approach, the same thing goes. It's, the app or the software embeds into the hardware or the firmware and basically creates the instructions for the firmware to run. Okay. That would be a really big problem from a software engineering standpoint if the hardware or the firmware or the XX all of a sudden started gaining sentience, right? And overriding instructions and saying, actually, no, I want to do these kinds of instruction sets. And, I'm talking mythological here, and nothing I say is real. Don't take anything that I say is real, but this might be why we have such a fear of artificial intelligence gaining sentience, okay? It's also this concept of the XX chromosome or the womb awakening and overriding certain instructions within the simulation. Because one thing that we have been learning about the nature of these simulation is that it is run through the dark matter matrix, the dark matter template, and that can be synonymous with the womb, okay? So there's a lot that you can learn by studying computer engineering, software engineering, as you study the nature of why, the case of why, okay? So we're not talking men and women here, okay? This is more about the coding behind men and women, okay? So this goes beyond gender, this transcends gender, okay? So for folks who are looking to expand their world, they are going to need to get through certain gatekeeping energies. And one of those main gatekeeping energies is going to be why. So this might manifest in your relationships, okay? Because if you are coded to be XX and you are trying to command your reality, command your world, you might be blocked by the why from a coding standpoint, okay? But this might show up in your simulation with your relationships with somebody who has a Y chromosome. There is a gatekeeper energy as it relates to the Y chromosome. To study this more, I'm going to give y'all some hints to just do your own research. Study the goddess Ashira. She is known as being, quote unquote, God's wife or God's first wife. And God in this case would be El, okay? There was a time when there was no El and the masculine and the feminine aspects were one, and there was no need to couple or to pair up through marriage, okay? But when a certain reset happened, and a lot of this can be traced to the land of Canaan and Sumerian sort of texts, there was a reboot, and God had a wife, and the wife's name was Asherah, okay? So study Asherah, study the archetype of Asherah, okay? Because she's known as being God's first wife, but there is also some energies around Asherah being known as a prostitute, okay? Now, a lot of people will poo-poo and turn their noses up at prostitution. And yet, prostitution is the world's oldest profession. There's a reason. And so we want to decode that. What are they saying when they say that prostitution is the world's oldest profession? We want to go like really deep with that. Go beneath the surface. Like, what is the simulation telling us if prostitution is the world's oldest profession? I'm going to give you all another thing to decode on your own time. So pimp, okay? If you were to do the etymology of pimp, if you were to like decode that, one of the words you would get for pimp is provider, okay? So in order for the prostitute to get access to resources, she does the work, but the pimp is the provider, provides her with the resource, okay? This is an example of the Y chromosome from a coding standpoint, okay? From a coding standpoint. So that is a little homework assignment. You know, if you feel called to do so, research the goddess Asherah, look at her as an archetype, and then research the etymology of pimp and provider. And that will be a little fun experience, okay? So one thing that the coding of the simulation is discussing is that, you know, Y needs X, right? The pimp can't make money without the prostitute, okay? The prostitute has the womb space. The prostitute has the goods. But what the pimp can do is interface within the world, provide a certain level of protection, provide a certain level of quote unquote security for the prostitute. So that's a lot of times why, you know, prostitutes say that they work with pimps, is because, you know, they get that extra security, you know, because selling your body, that can be kind of a nebulous, dangerous kind of task, right? So sometimes people choose to get a pimp in order for an extra form of security. But we also know that pimps are very dangerous, right? Like sometimes the pimp can be the person who causes and inflicts harm, okay? So I'm going to go more into that. That's probably like a Black Diamond conversation. There's a whole unpacking of the womb to be done. And I'm actually working on a course related to this. It's all connected to Saturn. And yeah, I'll be sharing that. It's developing now, but I'll be sharing that with a larger community soon. So wait for that, you know, look out for that. But back to this concept of the divine masculine, okay? So if we're thinking about the divine masculine from a coding standpoint, the divine masculine would represent the XY chromosome. The divine feminine would represent the XX chromosome. The divine masculine is supposed to be the provider, okay? The divine masculine is supposed to be the provider. But is a pimp divine? Like, is that a divine kind of energy? Okay, because when you think about the world's oldest profession, prostitution, it's kind of more of an underworld energy, right? Like, it's not legal, you know, even though it's like been around since civilization started. It's not something that a lot of times you can legally do. There's a lot of underworld sort of stuff you need to do in order to participate in that practice, whether you're buying or selling, okay? So if we think about this from a coding standpoint, XX being feminine, XY being masculine, then the pimp would be the divine masculine. But is that what you think about when you're thinking about uniting with your divine masculine? Are you thinking about uniting with your pimp or your provider? Some people are. And there's absolutely no judgment. You know, a lot of people who treat marriage more from a transactional standpoint, understand the coding of the simulation. Okay, so they're not really thinking about marriage or relationships from the standpoint of Disney movies. So this is why I really like to bring in different archetypes as it relates to different media examples, because a lot of these shows and these cartoons and these movies have programmed us at a very early age. And so we've not only gotten the movies, right? We've not only seen the movies, or we've seen the spin-offs or the shows, but we've also gotten the merchandise, okay? We've gotten the different colloquialisms associated with these different characters, okay? So in a previous archetypal analysis that I did related to the siren, I talked about the Little Mermaid and the programming of the Little Mermaid, and how basically Ariel in the Little Mermaid kind of like needed to give up everything for Eric, you know? And that was okay somehow. That was somehow romantic. And I discussed how problematic that was, and I gave an example more about, well, maybe Ursula wasn't as bad as people thought. You know, maybe Ursula was teaching Ariel about discernment. So if we think about, and I'm going to say something a little controversial, maybe, I don't know, probably everything I'm saying is controversial, but you know, this message isn't for everyone anyway, so whatever. Okay. If we were to take the concept of the XY chromosome, and if I were to put this into a Disney example, I would choose Beauty and the Beast, okay? I actually think that Beauty and the Beast was the most realistic portrayal of the, I know it sounds wild, was the most realistic portrayal of the XXXY chromosome. Okay, and this is something that I've not always believed, but just by doing my own practice, my own research, having my own experiences, it's become an understanding and also decoding quite a bit. Okay, so check this out. You have the Beast, all right? He looks like a beast. He has horns. He's furry. He's animalistic. He's mad all the time. He doesn't have manners. He has no mask. He's not trying to put on any airs. He is who he is, and that's it. Okay? He's a beast, and he accepts himself as being the Beast. This is a true XY chromosome. This is an XY chromosome that is fully anchored in who he is. Okay? He was problematic. He was definitely problematic, okay? Very much so, okay? You know, one thing that people say about Beauty and the Beast was that Belle, the character in this show, in this movie, she was going through Stockholm syndrome. She was in love with this beast. She loved him for who he was. She saw him for who he was, no masks, and she loved him, okay? And she had a guy who really wanted to marry her for who in all intents and purposes maybe would have been considered more of a divine masculine. This guy's name was Gaston. Okay, y'all remember Gaston? He was super buff. He had the cute face, but he was a beast inside. Okay, he had a mask that he wore, but he was actually more of a beast at the end of the day than the actual beast was, because he was wearing a mask. He was presenting himself as being so upstanding and such a pillar of the community. But when it came down to it, he was still a beast, but the act of wearing a mask and not really fully integrating who he was actually made him more toxic in the movie, okay? And so that's something. And then also he kind of wanted to subjugate Belle. You know, Belle was really big on books. She was a big book nerd, and she wasn't like wanting to be the typical wife, okay? She wanted her chance to explore her world through books, okay? And the Beast was a little bit more understanding about this, or a lot more understanding about this than Gaston was. You know, Gaston kind of wanted her to, you know, he liked her, he valued her, but he wanted her to fit into being his wife, okay? So that's another perspective on Beauty and the Beast, okay? Why am I utilizing Beast for Y chromosome, okay? Once again, this is not a judgment. This is what I've discovered through decoding, okay? So let me tell you all a story really quick. So I went to a college. I went to an all-women's college called Smith College. It was actually the first accredited all-women's college in the United States. Super hoity-toity. I mean, we're talking like Nancy Reagan went to my school, Barbara Bush went to my school, these types of folks, okay? And, Smith College actually, the name of the person, first of all, who created Smith College, her name was Sophia Smith. Okay, and so we also want to decode different ways that names show up in the simulation, because Sophia is spelled the same way as Sophia. And there's a whole story as it relates to Sophia and her being a creator goddess and stuff. So it's no accident that the person who started the first accredited women's college in the country of the US was named Sophia or Sophia, okay? But Smith, this school was designed to be a sister college for Yale. Okay, the deal was that because at this time there was no co-ed education. I mean, this started like way back in the 1800s. Okay, so there was no co-ed education. So the women went to one school and they were there to basically look good and to be trained to be high society wives. That was the original design of the college. That's not what Smith is about now, but that's what it was. That's the foundation it was designed upon. Okay. Now, really, it was, the school was designed for them to be wives of Yale graduates. Okay, so they would even have little dances together where it's like Smith undergrads and Yale undergrads would get together for these dances. And the idea was, okay, you'll find your husband here and all that stuff. Maybe there were some women I'm sure there were some women who were studying seriously, but the design of the college was for them to be eligible wives to really eligible bachelors, okay? And that was at Yale. And, I loved my experience at Smith, learned a lot, but, I did spend a little bit of time at Yale. And I went to a conference actually at Yale once. I think it was like my first year at Smith. And I just remember feeling like, man, I wish I had applied to Yale. I wish I had done the things to get into Yale, and it just felt like my dream school for some reason. It just felt like, it's like, man, if I could get into Yale, it would just mean that I've made it, I didn't realize that what I was really searching for was why. I didn't realize that at the time, but I just saw Yale and I saw the status. I was a little bit of a social climber back in the day, And yeah, I just really liked the concept of, being a student at Yale and all that stuff. I liked how like fancy people dress. People dress pretty fancy at Smith too, but I don't know, the air, the vibe just seemed a little bit more elite, a little bit more regal, okay? Well, let's decode Yale, because first of all, Yale has the letter Y in it. And, Yale is not, I was doing a little bit of research on the sort of people that Yale has been graduating recently. They actually have a very strong theater department. A lot of actors of color, AKA quote unquote Black actors, sometimes they actually graduate through their particular theater department. So I learned that. But, Yale, it doesn't have the same influence that it once had. I mean, Yale used to graduate lots and lots of the presidents. So it's like that old energy. It's that old power elite energy that you'll find at Yale, okay? The world is changing. So Yale doesn't have quite the same influence that it used to, okay? But at a particular time, and even, I went to Smith almost 20 years ago now. So, so 20 years ago was a lot different than today, okay? But anyway, Yale was my dream school. Well, Yale starts with Y. And there's an interesting thing when we decode what Yale means. It actually means horned beast. You can do the etymology on the word Yale, and you will find horned beast. There's also a locksmith company named Yale, okay? That's very popular, that makes a lot of the locks around the world. It's also named Yale, coded with Y. Why would Yale mean horned beast? And why would this graduate some of the most powerful leaders in the world at a particular time? It was also very exclusive, okay, a very exclusive college. Why would a college that's coded to be a horned beast, why would it graduate so many of the most powerful men, okay? The divine masculine doesn't exist, y'all. Okay, at least not in the way we've thought about it. If you're dreaming of your divine masculine, you're probably still caught up in a weird spell related to, I don't know, a bunch of romantic comedies and Disney movies that you don't even realize are playing in your imagination. Okay? The nature of the Y chromosome is more animalistic and beastly. Okay? You can see this too if you study the initiatory rites of fraternities and secret societies. Well, first of all, they do a lot of weird initiations, and a lot of times these initiations happen in the woods, okay? And these initiations can get really beastly and animalistic. It's not because they're acting out of character. It's because they are igniting their essence from within, and it's more of a beastly and animalistic nature. This is why in certain initiatory practices, many of which are closed to the XX chromosome, you will see a lot of animal and beastly symbolism as well as horned symbolism as it relates to this, okay? This is the true nature of the masculine, and it might not be divine. That's not a judgment. That's not to say it's bad, but you might be putting up a certain image or picture of what you're trying to call into your world. And as you see the beastly nature of the XY chromosome, you might be really disappointed and you might feel subjugated by this energy. So instead of looking for the divine masculine, I would suggest that you work on mastering the beast from within. Because you get to a certain point in your path when you are looking for greater access amongst the simulation and you're looking to master some pretty large institutional energies within the simulation, where you must embody the Y chromosome. You must embody the Y chromosome from within. And sometimes you must become your own husband in certain ways, in an energetic kind of way, okay? So, if you want to look for the masculine counterpart from outside of yourself, you are looking for a provider. You are looking for an intermediary. You're looking for a gatekeeper to help open doors for you. And I mean that more metaphorically, but also physically. And if that's you, that's totally okay. All right. I think that that's a more grounded approach to working with masculine energy within the day-to-day simulation. But you might get to a point where that energy is really taxing. The energy of having to find somebody to be in your orbit simply to gain you with certain access, it might become really tedious for you. And if that happens to you, then you need to embody the Y chromosome from within. Let's take another example of the Y chromosome, okay? Because there's coding as it relates to Y. So right now, a lot of people are talking about this concept called Y-ins. Y-ins. So you can look that up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But Y-ins are supposed to be a big problem. Y-ins don't know their place. Y-ins are supposed to be like with no home training. Y-ins show dread for the future. Y-ins need to pull up their pants. Okay, there's this concept of Y-ins that's coming out right now. Everything is coded in the simulation. There's a reason why they're calling them Y-ins, okay? YNs, actually, I vibe with them. I'm actually learning a lot about the masculine through listening to the music created by YNs. Okay. And they are true to their beastly nature, and they're not trying to apologize for it. They're not trying to wear masks. They're not trying to mask it. They're not trying to act like something that they're not. They just are. And they're actually really close to this like underworld horned beast kind of energy. And this is a very important, potent energy that makes things happen within the simulation. So YNs are basically saying, hey, mask off. I'm not going to try to be respectable or try to like look respectable or put on the mask that you're telling me to put on. I'm going to be exactly who I am and be true to it. So if you want to study the masculine nature, study the nature of the YN, okay? Now let's talk about the mask wearers, because I mentioned some things about certain secret societies and initiatory rites, and a lot of these things are closed off to the XX chromosome. If you don't have XY coded within you, you ain't getting through those gates, okay? You're not getting the information. It's not coded for you. Get you a provider who maybe has gone through those initiations if you want certain access. But there are certain people who have been coded as XX in the chromosome within the simulation who remember a time before the god known as El and the goddess known as Ashira, who remember a time when the masculine and feminine were united as one. And there are some people within the simulation who are more interested in moving within those energies and becoming their own access key, becoming their own road opener, becoming their own gate opener. And this message is specifically for you. You want to watch out for the mask wearers, okay? You get to certain initiatory rites and you start noticing that these groups wear masks. They use mask wearing as a part of their initiation. A lot of times these mask wearers close off their circles to beings coded with the XX chromosome. And these mask wearers have a great deal of power and influence within the simulation. Gaston, that example I mentioned earlier from Beauty and the Beast, he would be an example of a mask wearer. He's still a beast, okay? But he just wasn't visibly showing himself to be a beast. He had a pretty mask and he kept his beastly nature masked away. And his mask showed him more as a divine masculine. So if the XY chromosome is naturally coded to be more beastly, to be more of like a horned beast even, well, then we want to look at the beings who code themselves or mask themselves as being a divine masculine. They wear certain robes, they have certain garb, they hold the keys to certain texts, to certain spiritual practices, and they wear a mask of being divine, but they're really just a beast. And sometimes it's the ones who wear the mask that you can get the most damaged from, because you don't fully know what you're dealing with. It's kind of like that energy of Little Red Riding Hood, right? And the wolf comes to go get her, but the wolf at a certain point wears the mask of being the feeble old grandma, and that mask kind of causes you to lean in because your defenses are down, and then you get completely pulverized by the wolf, right? It's kind of like that. So look out for the mask wearers, okay? The ones who don masks, okay? The ones who wear the mask, because they're still the horned one. They're still more beastly in nature by design, and that's not a judgment. But they wear a mask to hide their inner nature, okay? And so as you are going through your path, you want to study the masked ones, okay? So, if you're looking for more information, more tools, and resources on your path, I'll share some links below. And then, if you're interested in this study of the XY chromosomes specifically, and some creative ways to maybe embody this energy as you work on navigating the simulation, then check out the Genetic Path Cutter tier on Patreon. And I'll be sharing more information about this and more so with connecting with the masculine nature. So I just want to be really clear that this is not a judgment against anybody who possesses the XY chromosome. There's a lot of people who are coded as XX, who are coded as being very feminine, right? But you will also need to master the beast from within, and you'll need to integrate that. And if you don't do that, then what you'll find is the beast will come and accost you. The beast will come and try to manipulate you sometimes. But if you have mastered the beast from within, you can actually understand the masculine aspect a lot better. And I think because there's a lot of stuff going on right now on social media with this quote battle of the sexes. But I think a big thing is that we don't fully understand each other. A lot of people who are coded as the XX chromosome are expecting their divine masculine, quote unquote. They're expecting their Disney prince to show up, but they were never there. They were just wearing a mask. You actually want to, if you want to unite with a masculine energy in the physical, then you need to integrate and to do so in a way that feels, because you can pair up with a masculine energy quite easily. It's not hard. But if you want to do so in a way that's more balanced, right, in a way that feels more empowering, then you would want to master the beast from within. Okay, master those energies from within. And maybe you don't want to unite with the masculine in the physical. But if you want to, quote unquote, they call it breaking the glass ceiling. Okay. I'm not a feminist, but that's a feminist sort of way of saying things, and basically this glass ceiling represents the XY chromosome. The XX chromosome is trying to get certain access to certain things. They can, it's not to say that people who are coded as XX don't have power and all that stuff, but it's always less, right? In the simulation, it's always less. And the issue is why. Okay, so we need to look at the nature of the Y chromosome. It does act as a form of a key, okay? And so you would want to work on embodying the coding of that key in order to increase your access to build the world that you want to live in and thrive in. So I'm going to leave it there. Sending you lots of love, joy, and peace until we meet again. Bye.